What's up, guys? So today we got a question from Christian. He says that he's a big fan of the videos, and he says that he's been watching all of my YouTube videos trying to find an answer to his question, but he can't find one. But he's running into a particular problem right now that he wanted to send to me to get some perspectives on. So he says that he's been training jiu-jitsu for about 8 months, really consistently training a lot. He was a high school wrestler previously, and he says at his gym, his coach has a relatively newer jiu-jitsu program, and over the 8 months, he's become like one of his coach's best competitors. You know, he's a young guy and he's been competing and he's winning. His last competition, he said there was a 14-man bracket. He had 4 submissions and 0 points scored against him, and he said that his coach promoted him to blue belt. And he's having those imposter syndrome feelings. Everybody that's been promoted at some point has had those before, Christian. But, you know, he just doesn't feel like he's ready. And his big worry is that he has a competition coming up. And he's worried about competing because his coach is a friend, a mentor. He looks up to him. He's very close with him, right? He doesn't want to change the dynamic between the relationship that they have because, you know, he wants to go out and show people how good he is and how good his coach is. And he's worried that if he comes up short and loses, that somehow it's going to affect the relationship that he has with his coach very negatively. And so he sent the message to me looking for some ideas and perspectives on it. So, Christian, thanks for the question, brother. Now, for anybody watching this, maybe if you're in a similar situation, I'll ask you these. I'll sort of share the questions I asked Christian. Ask these to yourself in your own mind. But Christian, I asked you these 2 questions on Instagram. I said, do you think it's inevitable that you're going to lose? And do you think your coach knows that you're going to lose at some point? And to both of those questions, you answered yes. You said, I know I'm going to lose at some point, and I know my coach knows I'm going to lose at some point, right? And so again, you are worried about something that's inevitable. And I'll get to why we understand it's kind of a silly thing, but I'll talk about it in a second. But the first thing to think about is if your coach is a competitor, if they used to be a competitor, maybe they're a little bit older, whatever, I guarantee you they're probably not going to judge you that harshly if you lose, necessarily. What I mean by this is when I watch my students, and this is what a lot of the coaches that I know are like, we watch our students, and when they win, we are excited for them, right? There's nothing better than seeing one of your students win and know that you had a role to play in it. That feels so good. But I really judge people on how they lose, right? Because it's easy once you've won. Like when you're getting the gold medal around your neck, your hands getting raised, it's a good feeling, right? Very easy to be in that place mentally. But more telling is, well, what kind of character do you have when you're losing? You know, do you get up and do you pout about it? Do you throw a fit about it? Do you get upset? Do you blame the ref? Do you blame other people? How do you deal with that situation? That tells me more about you, and that's where I'm going to judge you. Also, when you get back to training, do you work harder? Do you start to focus on the mistakes you made? What do you do after the loss? And again, a lot of times these losses are what are going to define you long term. Like just recently, I was listening to Dan Gable on the Joe Rogan podcast, and in that podcast, Dan Gable was talking about, you know, like where he lost. He had one loss in college or whatever, and that loss, he said, made him so much better because, you know, the way he responded to it. And it reminds me of an old Alan Watts lecture years ago that I was listening to where he tells a story about a farmer. Right? He says the farmer is there, you know, in the village, and he's got a horse. Well, the horse runs away one day, gets out of the field and runs away. And the people in the village come up to him and say, oh, that's terrible luck. You've lost your horse. And he responds to them and says, we'll see. Later on, the next day, that one horse that he had ends up coming back into the field, and it also attracted 8 other wild horses. So now he's got 9 horses in his field. All the villagers came up to him and said, that's terrific luck. Look at all those horses. You've got 9 now. That's awesome. And his response to them was, we'll see. The next day, his son's on one of the horses, one of the wild ones, trying to break it, and the horse ends up chucking him off. He breaks his leg. And, you know, again, people go, oh, that's terrible. He broke his leg. The farmer said, we'll see. The next day, there's been a terrible war going on, and the next day, the officer is looking for people to draft into the military, and they see this young man. They're getting ready to draft him, and they go, oh, his leg's broke. We can't take him. He's not able to make it into the military. So they go on and move away, right? And, you know, so his son avoids getting sent to the war. And the people in the village go up to him and say, oh, that's great, right? And the farmer says, we'll see. And, you know, the idea behind it is that we always want to sort of put everything into a category. This is good and this is bad, right? But again, later on, like I look back at some of the losses that I've had too, and they were kind of a good thing because they brought mistakes that were happening in my game to the forefront. They made me like train better and train harder, all that kind of stuff. So long term, like they stung when they happened and they didn't feel good. But now they're kind of a good thing. I look back at them, I'm like, I'm kind of glad I lost. Just like Dan Gable in the podcast was saying he was glad he lost. So think about this. Even if you do lose, because it's inevitable you're going to, the way you respond to it is going to define everything. And I guarantee you, I can't guarantee you because I don't know your coach, but I almost can guarantee you that the way you respond to that loss will tell your coach more about you than, if you're winning, Now, the last thing sort of to throw out at you, and this is just a general idea about competing, is you want to be able to compete in a very an excited place, but also somewhat free. What I mean by this is, let's think about living, right? If you woke up every single day worried that you were going to die today, right? Today was going to be the last day that you were going to live, you would be racked with so much anxiety, you wouldn't be able to do anything because you'd be too worried all the time. But death's going to happen at some point. Maybe that's a morbid thought for some people, but it is. It's going to happen at some point. We're all going to die. But that's going to happen. So what do you do instead? You eat, you try to eat right, you try to exercise, do things that are healthy to ward off death for as long as possible. But in the meantime, you got to live your life and be who you are, right? You just do what you got to do, right? Same thing for your training. You don't want to go into the competition worried, what if I lose this one? What if I don't do well? And what if you're thinking about the end result, right? You can't do that. What you got to think about is the present. What am I doing right now with this person? Am I going for my techniques? Am I going after them, trying to win the match? That's where you have to be when you're competing. And you got to be able to take chances. And if you're going to be worried about if you lose, you're not going to be able to take the opportunities that are present. So what do you do in the meantime? You train hard, you eat right, you do extra cardio, you do extra drilling, you do all the things that you can do to possibly increase your chances of winning, right? And to ward off the loss, that against inevitable, but you try to ward off as many as you can. And then when it comes time to compete, just like you live your life, you just go out and compete and you just do the damn thing and do your best and be as free to take chances and take opportunities as they come. So that's the idea, brother. I can almost promise you your coach, if you lose a match, is not going to look down on you. It's not going to change the dynamic. It'll change the dynamic if you stop training hard, if you get discouraged by the loss and you give up, right? Then maybe it would change the dynamic. And again, being worried about something that's inevitable, it's going to happen at some point. So you do everything you can to sort of ward those things off. But when it comes time to actually go after the competition, man, you've got to be in a place mentally free where you can just take chances and go after it when the opportunities present themselves. Otherwise, if you're what ifing about the loss, you're going to be hamstrung to pull the trigger when it's time to go for your techniques as the opportunities are there. So, brother, hopefully that's useful to you, Christian. Thank you so much for the question. And guys, I'll talk to you next time.